I make no secret of the fact that I am a fan of the late and great Michael Jackson. And despite his share of personal issues, which there are, of course, many, few people have actually walked this earth with as much talent and energy and passion in one body as this man did. And in fact, for those of you who are wondering how I personally managed to marry someone as smart and beautiful and sweet as Marilyn, I will give the credit to my outfit from our first date, which was the Thriller jacket and Billie Jean glove. And before you judge too quickly, I will say that it was Halloween. I don't make a habit of wearing Michael Jackson paraphernalia on first dates, but there it was. So, to be honest with you, there are very few things in this world that irritate me as much as these made-for-TV media circus murder trials that there seem to be every few months. But I have followed, because of this, I have followed the last couple of weeks with great interest the civil trial of Dr. Conrad Murray. Has anybody been following this? Conrad Murray was the doctor who was attending to Michael Jackson in his final days when he died back in 2009. And on the news this week, they announced that Dr. Murray would be pleading the Fifth. Pleading the Fifth, which you may know refers to the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution and basically just says you don't have to testify against yourself. It's made famous on cop shows where we usually hear it as you have the right to remain silent, right? You all know that line. So I guess because of this, we'll never know what Dr. Murray thinks about all of this going on these days. But I do think that silence can be a good thing. And I think especially in the days after Jesus was crucified, there was probably a lot of silence to go around. We are now 1 week after Easter, and all week I've had these 12 disciples on my mind. After Jesus was resurrected and spent 40 days on the earth and then left to go up into heaven, these people, they had no leader, they had no teacher, they had no one to guide them, and on top of that, Jesus had asked them to give up everything to follow him. Jesus had asked them to give up their homes, their money, their family, and then all of a sudden this guy's gone and they have nobody to tell them what to do next after they've done all of those things. So now he's gone. What must the disciples have been thinking? What must Mary and Martha have been thinking? What were they to do? Well, Stephen read for us just a moment ago that story from Acts, which you may or may not have heard before, but it recalls that the disciple Peter was imprisoned for, among other things, for following Jesus. And when they threw Peter in jail, they gave him an order and they said, look, you can't keep going around talking about this so-called good news that you keep talking about. Jesus is gone and you can't do that anymore. And somehow when he's in prison overnight, Peter's chains break and he goes out into the town square and he just can't help himself. He begins to cry aloud to all the people around him that there is mercy, there is hope in Jesus Christ for all people. So when he's doing that, they've already given him this order, and the guards, they pin him up in chains, and they lock him up, and they put him on trial, and they say, Peter, we told you you can't keep doing that. You've got to stay silent. And Peter replies, my obedience is to God, not to people. We're not so different from the disciples. The one person that we are here tonight to praise, the one person that we're here tonight to worship, is not sitting with us. We can't see that person. So what are we to do? We're left with the same questions that the disciples face. Let me ask you this. When it comes to when it comes to our faith, do you think of yourself as Peter? Or do you think of yourself as Dr. Murray that we talked about at the beginning? In other words, when our faith is on the line, do we speak boldly, or do we plead the fifth when it comes to our faith? Do we believe that God has empowered us to bring good news to the poor, to the oppressed, or do we remain silent in hopes that no one will notice us, in hopes that we can just skate through life without rocking the boat, without causing any trouble? As Christians, we have the right to remain silent, but we have the calling to reclaim hope. The world is too small and too small-minded for good people to stay quiet. In fact, God has commanded us to let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. That is our great challenge. That's our great calling as Christians. In Jesus' day, that was about the lepers and the tax collectors that nobody else wanted to be with. In Lincoln's day, it was generations of slaves who were waiting for someone to stand with them and echo those words of Moses, to let my people go. In the day of MLK, it was people who had been beaten down so badly that they had to write out on a sign that I am a man. Who is it in our day? Who is it in our generation that we are called to bring justice to bring mercy to? For whom does the calling of the prophet Isaiah ring true? To undo the heavy burden, to let the oppressed go free. Who is that in this world right now? I'm giving you permission tonight to actually answer that question, to step back from your own life and to say, where do I fit in God's unfolding story of history that's yet to be written? We know that history is full of those who have spoken up, just like we know it's equally full of those who have laid silent. You know the words of the pastor Martin Niemöller, who spoke about the rise of the Nazis leading up to World War II, and he said these famous words: first they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. As Christians, we are called to speak up. Not just because we are going to need somebody to speak up for us one day, but because we are all children of God. And those who suffer are our brothers in hope. Those who lack dignity are our sisters in Christ. We are called to speak up. So shall we remain silent in trepidation, or shall we speak boldly with compassion? Think about this. When at last you draw your very last breath on this earth, is there anybody that's going to be left behind saying that when it came to your faith, you just pleaded the fifth? You may remember those initial terrible reports from the Columbine school shooting about a couple of young women. One of them was named Valine Schnoor, and Valine was shot and cried out in that moment, "My God, don't let me die." And the guy who shot her looked at her and he said, "God, why do you believe in God?" And she just looked back and she said, "I believe in God because my parents brought me up that way." I don't know why it is that the world tries to silence hope. I don't know why it is that the world tries to stifle goodness, to squander compassion. But if we allow ourselves to become victims of that scheme, then we indict ourselves as accomplices of it. In the face of utter despair and persecution and tolerance that exists not just in our world but in our city, Christ has commanded us to be his voice, to bring common sense, but moreover to demand uncommon grace? Shall we speak up? Or shall we plead the fifth when our faith is put to the test? There's an old legend about this priest who was wise and straightened in his ways, and this priest specialized in finding people who had wandered off the path and bringing them back to God. And so one day, a mother brings her son to this priest, and she pleads with the priest, "You've got to help me. Nothing else I've tried has worked. My son just sits around all day long asking these questions about God and talking about God and saying all these crazy things, and the neighbors show up and they listen to him, and some of them laugh at him. You've got to help me." And the priest thinks about it, and he pulls the son aside. And he talks to the son, and he says, "What's wrong?" And the son just looks up at the priest, and he says, "I don't know. I've just been wrestling, wandering and wrestling." And the priest says to the son, to the boy, "With whom are you wrestling?" And the boy very quickly replies, "With God, of course. Who else do you wrestle with?" And the son looks at the priest, and the priest looks at the son, and the priest thinks about it and thinks he knows how to fix the boy. And so he takes the boy to his house, and he starts teaching him carpentry. And they have, while they're working with the wood, they have all these conversations, these long conversations about God, about what we think about God. And the priest tells the son, while they're working with the wood, he says, "God doesn't want you to cause trouble. God doesn't need you to speak up. God's just that guy up in heaven that wants you to believe in him." So the son grows up, and the priest becomes very proud, because he hears about all these great, magnificent things that the boy grew up and built out of wood, and he was so proud of him. And the boy goes home to his mother, Mary. And the priest hears that boy became the greatest carpenter in all of Nazareth. The priest had cured him. The priest had trained him to be the best carpenter in all of Nazareth. What is the world training you to be? Will you pray with me? God, tonight we ask that you may open our eyes, that you may open our ears, that we may become your voice in this world, that we may learn to speak with justice and compassion, that we may learn to speak boldly, to let your people go, that we may all grow closer to you and closer to your ways. God, for the gift of your Son, who was not only a carpenter, but who saved the world, we give you thanks. And God, we ask that you help us to find our place in that unfolding story before us now. Amen.